Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis 19b of Maseches Kiddushin. We're starting from the second line of the page in the middle with the Taf Resh. It says Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. So we learn in a Brisa, Ketzad Mitzvahs Yiyud. How is Yiyud performed? Yiyud, the designation of a maidservant as a wife to either the master or his son. How is it done? So Omer la bifnei shnayim, so what he does is, he says to her in front of two witnesses, Harei at mikudeshes li, or Harei at meureses li, you are betrothed to me, different languages of betrothal, and that's what he does, meaning that there's no giving over of any money. Either you hold the money was given when he bought her, when he purchased her as a maidservant from the father, or that's not the Kiddushin money, but rather it's the fact that he is letting her off now from her maidservant duties, that shibud, that obligation that she has, that he's letting her off, that could be what she's receiving, but there's no transfer of anything at this moment. So, Harayat Mikudeshes Le'er Miresesli. He just says those words to her, and they are married. Afilu B'sof Sheish, even if it's at the very end of her 6-year term, as long as that 6-year term is not yet finished, she's still a maidservant. Even if it's the end of the day and the last day, it's almost shkia, it's almost sunset, she's almost finished her term as a maidservant, but as long as it's before that, he can marry her without giving new Kiddushin money. It's carrying over from either, again, the original money or the fact that he's letting her off now. And from now on, he will conduct himself with her as married. They are now husband and wife, and he cannot conduct and treat her like a shifcha any longer, like a maidservant. They are now husband and wife, and he now has certain obligations to her, and her obligations to him change. She's no longer obligated to work like a maidservant. She has specific obligations that a wife has to her husband. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, Im yeshahos b'yom k'dei lasos imo shava pruta mikudeshes, ve'im lav eina mikudeshes. So here is where we have the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda again, that we've had in the past. Last week we talked about it a lot, and the week before. And again, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that it depends. It's not enough just that it's samuch l'shkia sachama. If it's almost sunset, that may actually not be, may be too late at that point for him to be mekadesh her, for him to betroth her. Rather, he says it depends. If there's enough time that the work that she would do in that time would be worth at least a pruta, and then he lets her off of that work, so then he's, so to speak, giving her a value of a pruta, so then it can be Kiddushin. But if there's 1 minute left before sunset, and the work that she could do in that 1 minute isn't worth a pruta, and he says, I want to betroth you on that value, well, it's not worth a pruta, then the Kiddushin wouldn't work. Now the Gemara says, Mashal, this can be compared to the following case. Le'omer le'isha, to a man who says to a woman, not talking about a maidservant, a man says to a woman, Hiskachi li me'achshav, you should become betrothed to me from this moment, le'achar shloshim yom, but 30 days from now. So retroactively, 30 days from now, I want you to be betrothed from this moment. That's what he says. Uba acher v'kidsha, b'soch shloshim yom, and then in the middle of those 30 days, someone else came along and was mekadesh her and betrothed her. So who is she married to? The one who said that I want to be mikudeshes to you from right now, but retroactively it should only kick in 30 days, or somebody came in between before it kicked in 30 days from now, retroactively, but before it kicked in, someone else came and was mekadesh her. So who is she mikudeshes to? So the according to this brisa, it says she mikudeshes l'rishon. She is mikudeshes to the first guy, the one who said 30 days from now you'll be mikudeshes to me from this moment. So the brisa is saying that this is what we previously said is comparable to this case. We previously mentioned that the master can betroth the maidservant up until the last day, and up until the last moments even, before Shkia, except that Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, no, not quite. There has to be at least enough time for her to work a Shava Pruta worth of work. So, and then it says, and that's comparable to this case of a man who betroths a woman for 30 days, who's from now, in 30 days from now, to retroactively take effect, and then in between someone else comes and betroths her, that the Brisa says that she's betrothed to the first man, not the second one. Meaning she's betrothed to the one who said 30 days from now, retroactively from now. So the Gemara says, Mashal Leman. It's comparable to whose opinion? The opinion of the Rabbanan or the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda? Ilema Mashal Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. If you tell me it's comparable to the case of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, to his opinion, he's the one who held that you have to have at least pruta worth of work left in the day in order to be meyayed, to designate the maidservant as a wife. So says the Gemara, it can't be comparable to him. He said that if there's enough time left in the day, then she is mikudeshes. V'im lav lo. But if not, then not. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, as we've talked about previously in the past, last week, that he holds that the Kiddushin is only going to kick in now, even though there was this sale as a maidservant originally, but we don't view that original money that was given as the Kiddushin. We view right now this moment where he lets her off of a pruta's worth of work as the time that the Kiddushin is going to kick in. It doesn't retroactively kick in from the beginning, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, it would follow that if somebody came in between, while she was a maidservant, before he was meyayed her, and tried to marry her, it should work. It should work because the Kiddushin isn't going retroactive to the sale of the maidservant. It's happening only right now in those final moments. So our case of non-maidservant, our case where somebody says that you should be mikudeshes from now, 30 days from now, and then somebody comes in between before it kicks in, according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, perhaps that actually we would say the Kiddushin of the second guy who came and swooped in between, that his Kiddushin should work, because it only will take effect in the last moments. Just like the maidservant, the Kiddushin's only at the end, so too in that case of 30 days from now, perhaps it will only be at the end. So the Gemara says, so Amar Racha Brei de Rava Mashal L'Rabbanan. Yeah, says Racha Brei de Rava, this case is comparable to the opinion of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say that the Kiddushin, the Rabbanan hold that the maidservant's Kiddushin is the money that the master originally gave to the father, and so it's really taking effect at the very beginning of the sale of the maidservant. So if somebody would come after that and try to marry her, he couldn't. So to here, where he says me'achshav, he says it should take effect from now, even though it's only going to kick in later, but it's retroactive to now, and if somebody would come and betroth her, it shouldn't work. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious that you can compare this to the Rabbanan's opinion. What exactly is it adding by bringing in this case? So the Gemara says, Ma'u detema, what would I have thought? Halo amar le me'achshav. Kamash malan. I would have thought that since the father, when he sold the maidservant to the master, he didn't say me'achshav, he didn't say from now. So you might think that you don't have to even say from now. You might think, if not for the mashal, if not for the fact that the Gemara, the Brisa specifically gave us the case that's comparable, you might have gone even further and said that if a man betroths a woman and says, I want to be betrothed to you in 30 days, without saying me'achshav, from now, retroactively, he just says in 30 days, you might have said that also kicks in from when he says it. And if somebody would come in between, before the 30 days elapse and try to betroth her, it wouldn't work. That's what you might have said. But that's not true. according to the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan would say, no, it's only because you said me'achshav. Now, if you were trying to make the comparison on your own, you may not have concluded that you have to say me'achshav from now. Because in the case of the maidservant, over there, the father doesn't say me'achshav. He just sells the his daughter as a maidservant to the master without saying that the Kiddushin would be retroactive from now. We know that that's how it works, that it kicks in from now. But that's how it works because it's specific to that scenario of the maidservant. But the Bryce is saying you might want to take from there and compare and say that even in a case where a man says to a woman, you'll be betrothed to me in 30 days, without saying from now, that too kicks in from now. That's what the Bryce is saying. No. It's only comparable to the case where you say me'achshav. If you say me'achshav, if you say from now, so then it kicks in retroactively from now, and if someone else would come along in between and try to betroth her, then it wouldn't work. She would be mikudeshes, she would be betrothed to the first guy. That's what the Rabbanan are teaching you, that's what the Bryce is teaching you. Tanya idach, we have another Bryce. The other Bryce says, Hamocher es bito, if a man sells his daughter as a maidservant, v'halach v'kidsha la'acher, and then he goes along, he just sold her as a maidservant, and he goes and he sells her, and he's mekadesh her, he accepts Kiddushin from another man. So he sells her to Reuven as a maidservant, and then he goes to Shimon and he accepts Kiddushin from Shimon. Says the Brisa, Sichek ba'adon umikudeshes l'sheni. He's mocking, he's playing with the master, that he sold her to him, because in fact she's mikudeshes l'sheni, she is betrothed to the second guy. Even though he sold her as a maidservant, he has the ability to accept Kiddushin on her behalf from a different guy. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, which fits into his opinion that because the Kiddushin, the ability for her to marry the master is only at the end, right? It doesn't kick in retroactively according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. The original money is not the Kiddushin money, so there's no retroactive Kiddushin here, and that's why the father can still be mekadesh her to another man. The Chachamim say that's the other opinion, that in Ratza L'Yayid M'Yayid. No, if the master wants to marry her, to designate her as a wife, he has that ability, even though the father tried to be mekadesh her to someone else. No, the master can overrule by himself designating her as his own wife, or for his son. Because again, they hold that it's retroactive to when he paid and purchased her as a maidservant. He can transfer that into Kiddushin, and it would take effect from that moment. Mashal, and again the Brisa says a mashal. It says that we could compare this to a case of la'omer la'isha, of where a man says to his wife, Harayat mikudeshes li la'achar shloshim yom, you should be sanctified to me after 30 days. And he doesn't say me'achshav in this case, he doesn't say from now. Uba acher v'kidsha b'soch shloshim yom. And someone else comes and betroths her within those 30 days. Shemikudeshes l'sheni, that she is mikudeshes to the second one. So the Gemara says, again, mashal laman. Who are we comparing this? Again, the case that we're comparing it to is where he says to a woman, you should be betrothed to me after 30 days. He doesn't say after, he doesn't say from now. Someone else comes within the 30 days and is mekadesh her, betroths her. This Brisa says that the second one is betrothed to her. So mashal laman, who is this compared to? Who would make this comparison? Ilema l'Rabbanan, if you say it's like the Rabbanan, ha'amri Rabbanan, but the Rabbanan said in this Brisa, im ratza l'yayed miyayed. If the master wants to be miyayed her, if he wants to designate her, if he wants to marry her, then he has that right. It's his prerogative. So at this point in the Gemara, the logic seems to assume, the Gemara is assuming that actually me'achshav doesn't make a difference. We're saying that according to the Rabbanan, even if he didn't say me'achshav, if he just said after 30 days and then someone else tried to swoop in and be mekadesh her, he wouldn't be able to. Because by saying after 30 days, that's comparable to our case where the master, the Rabbanan say, has the option at the end of the term, at the end of the period, to decide whether or not to be mekadesh her, and nobody can swoop in and take that right away from him. That's what we assume now the Rabbanan hold. So it can't be the Rabbanan. So Ella Amar Rav Acha Breder Rava. So Rav Acha, the son of Rava, says, Mashal Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. We would be comparing it to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda said that you can't come along. You could. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda said that the father is allowed to betroth his daughter even after he sold her, because even though technically a yiyud, a marriage could kick in at the end, but it only kicks in at the end, and so in between the father could betroth her to someone else instead. And similarly here, if a man says, I'll betroth you after 30 days, well, it only kicks in after 30 days. And in between, someone else could betroth her. So the Gemara says Pshita, so that's obvious. What's the difference? So Ma'od Tema, what might I have said? Halo Amar la la'acher shloshim yom. Kamash malan. I might have said that in the case of Yud, in the case of the maidservant, he didn't say after 30 days. He didn't commit to anything. He just bought her as a maidservant. So maybe that's where we say, if you didn't plan, you didn't commit, you didn't say, I will be miyayed her. Maybe that's where we say that the father can now go and designate her to someone else, can go and be mekadesh her to someone else, because there wasn't any commitment there. But maybe in the case where the guy says, after 30 days, I'm going to be betrothed to you, and he commits himself to that, maybe you would say that there, even Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda would say that you can't, he can't go or she can't go and become betrothed to someone else, because she's already designated and committed to this first guy. She accepted Kiddushin for after 30 days. Kamash Malan, that's what the Bryce is coming to say, that no, even in that case, she's able to walk away from her commitment. The fact that she said, I accept Kiddushin to be in effect after 30 days, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would say, it only kicks in after 30 days, just like by the maidservant, it only kicks in at the end. The original money wasn't the Kiddushin money. We view the Kiddushin as taking place at the end, so I suppose similarly over here, we don't say that the original money for Kiddushin that he gave now is where we see that it takes effect. It only takes effect at the end, at the time that he said, the time after 30 days, and before those 30 days elapse, she could go and take Kiddushin from someone else and be married to him instead. That's what this is coming to teach me, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Tanya Idach, we have another brisa. Hamocher es bito, a man sold his daughter as a maidservant. Upasak, and he stipulated to the master, I'm selling her to you as a maidservant, on condition that you don't marry her. You may not designate her. I'll sell you as a maidservant, on condition that you don't marry her. I want her to go free at the end, I guess. Niskayim hatnai. It works. That condition works. Divri Rabbi Meir, that's the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that a man can sell his daughter as a maidservant and stipulate that I'm selling her on condition that you, the master, may not marry her. The Chachamim Omrim, and the Chachamim say, Imratza leyayid meyayid, that even if that stipulation is made, that condition is made, it doesn't take effect, and if the master wants to marry her, he's allowed to marry her. Why? Because the father made a tanai, he made a condition about something that's written in the Torah. And the halacha is that if one makes a tanai, one makes a condition on something that's written in the Torah, then that condition is nullified. You can't rewrite the halacha. And since the halacha is that when when a woman or a girl is sold as a maidservant, the master has the right to be meyayed her, to designate her as a wife, the father selling cannot make any conditions on the sale that says that you don't have that right. That's called masnal mashakasta batorah. You're making a condition about something that's written in the Torah. So that's the opinion of the Rabbanan. Ask the Gemara, Ula Reb Meir Tano Kayam. Reb Meir holds that the Tanai, the condition, works. Vatanya, but we learned in a brisa, Ha'omer li'isha mekudeshes li. If a man says to a woman, you are betrothed to me, almana she'en lach alai she'er kisus v'ona. I want to marry you on condition that I have no obligations to you, that I'm not obligated to provide food, I'm not obligated to provide shelter, clothing, and I'm not obligated to provide ona, conjugal obligations, sexual relations, if those are obligations that a man has to his wife. And Rameir says if a man tries to marry a woman, betroth her, on condition that he won't have those obligations, harezeh mikudeshes. The Kiddushin works, utano batal, but the Tanai doesn't, the condition doesn't. He's married to her, but we cancel the condition and he has all those obligations to her. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is saying that you can't be masna mashakasav b'Torah. You can't make a Tanai on Torah obligations. You can't make a condition to rewrite one's obligations. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'davar shebemamon tano kayim. With regards to the monetary items, then the Tanai works. Meaning we have another rule. It's true in general. You can't be masna mashakasav b'Torah. You can't make a condition about things that are in the Torah, but that doesn't apply to monetary matters. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Kol Tanai shebemamon kayim. You make a Tanai, you make a condition regarding monetary matters. You have that right, and so he would not have the monetary obligations to her of food and clothing, but he would still have the conjugal obligations. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. But in any event, Rabbi Meir is saying that you can't be masna mashakasav b'Torah. You can't make a Tanai, a condition about what's written in the Torah. So how could Rabbi Meir hold that when it comes to the maidservant, if the father is able to sell his daughter as a maidservant on condition that the master not marry her? That's masna mashakasav b'Torah. So Amar Chizkiah, said to explain, Shani hacha, here it's different. To Amar Kra, because the pasuk says le'ama. It says in the pasuk when a man sells his daughter le'ama, as a maidservant. And what does that teach us? It teaches me pa'amim she'eno mochra ela le'ama bilvad, that there are times that he can sell her only as an amma, only as a maidservant. I suppose this is extra. It shekirv zosag when he sells his daughter. Why does it say la'ama as a maidservant? That's what he's selling her as. The idea is, says Chizkiah, it's coming to teach you, the extra la'ama is saying sometimes he sells her only as an amma, only as a maidservant, because he can say that I'm selling her to you, but you cannot marry her. So even though generally we say you can't make a Tanai, even though Rabbi Meir holds in general you can't make a condition about halach in the Torah, but here the Torah teaches us that with regards to this, sometimes he can sell her just as an amma, just as a maidservant, and he could say you cannot marry her. There are times when you can sell her only as an amma. The Rabbanan who argue on Rabbi Meir and held that no, that's masna mashakasav b'Torah, you're making a condition about what's in the Torah, and the father cannot sell her on that condition, and if she's sold, the master can still marry her. So what do they do with this word la'ama, this extra word? What do the Rabbanan learn from it, from the word la'ama as a maidservant? They need it for that which is taught in the Brisa. Le'ama, it says, as a maidservant, melamed, this teaches me, shemochra lepsulem, that he has a right to marry her to someone who is pasul, who may not marry her. So, for example, a mamzer. A mamzer is only allowed to marry specific types of people, including other mamzers, but can't marry her. So maybe you would say that the father can't sell her to a mamzer because they can't be married. But this Brisa says that there are situations where you could. Meaning there's no condition stipulated here. That would be a problem. That wouldn't work, the Rabbanan would say. You can't make that condition, and the sale would still go through. La'ama's teaching me that the father can sell her just as a maidservant because he's selling her to a mamzer, and a mamzer is not allowed to marry her. Kiddushin would take effect if he would try, but he's not allowed to. And that's what La'ama's teaching me, that the father can sell his daughter as a maidservant to a pasul, to someone who is forbidden to marry her, and he won't marry her. She'll just be a maidservant. Asks the Gemara, Valo dinu. But logically that shouldn't make sense. Imekacha lipsulim. Excuse me, the opposite. Why do I need? It's questioning. It's questioning the logic. It's saying, how can that be? Sorry, one second. Yeah, sorry. It's saying I should be able to figure that out on my own. I don't need a pasuk to teach me that. Halodeo, it's kal v'chomer. Imekacha lipsulim. If Kiddushin works, if Kiddushin is tofis, if Kiddushin takes effect by a pasul, by a mamzer, so isn't it all the more so? Eino din. That lo yimkareno lipsulim. Shouldn't you also be able to sell her to a pasul? If Kiddushin can work, then you should be able to sell her also. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me that he's allowed to sell her to a pasul, to a mamzer? I should be able to figure that out on my own. So the Gemara explains, no, you wouldn't be able to learn from the fact that you could be mekadesh her to the fact that you can sell her. Because ma'ale mekadsha lipsulim sheking adam mekadesh espito kishehi naira. We find that when it comes to Kiddushin, there's certain situations, certain scenarios where you could do Kiddushin, but you can't sell. An example would be a naira. A naira, when a girl has reached puberty, but she's not yet fully an adult. She's between 12 and 12 and a half. So the father is still able to be mekadesh. He could still accept Kiddushin. But at that point, you think he could still sell her to a pasul? But you can't sell your daughter when she's a naira, when she's 12 years old. You can no longer sell her. We learned that earlier in the Masechta, that since she goes free when she's 12, so then you can't sell her when she's 12. She goes free at 12. So that when she's a naira. So the Gemara is showing us that there are situations where Kiddushin works, but Mechira doesn't work, where you could betroth her, but you can't sell her. For example, a naira. A naira, a father could betroth her. He could accept Kiddushin on her behalf, but he can't sell her. So maybe by psulim you would say the same thing. Maybe the father, he could be mekadesh her to a pasul. He's not supposed to, but it works. But maybe you'd say it doesn't work for him to sell her to a pasul. That's why we need this pasuk to tell me that no, it still works. He could sell her to a pasul. La'ama, there are times where he sells her just as a maidservant, where marriage isn't really going to follow. For example, he sells her to someone who's pasul, someone who's disqualified for marrying her, like a mamzer. There, he could still sell her as a maidservant. That's what La'ama teaches me according to the Rabbanan. The Gemara continues, and it says, right, Talmud Lomar, that's why the Torah tells me La'ama, to an Amma Melamed Shemocher Lipsulim, to teach me that he can sell her to a pasul, to a mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Im Lelamed Shemocher Lipsulin Harik Var Nemar. If it's teaching me that, if La'ama was coming to teach me that he's allowed to sell her to someone who's pasul, someone who's disqualified, like a mamzer, he says that's already taught, I don't need that. Because it says, Imra'a be'enei adoneha. If she's bad in the eyes of her master, what is it? And so he doesn't marry her. That's what the pasuk says. If she's bad in the eyes of her master and he doesn't marry her, what does it mean that she's bad in the eyes of her master? Shera b'nisuah, that it's bad to marry her, meaning that he can't marry her. She's pasul to him. So we see there's situations from this drasha that it describes someone as ra b'nei adoneh, bad in her eyes, that he's not able to marry her because he's not allowed to. So what's that talking about? Says Rabbi Eliezer, it's talking about a pasul. It's talking about if he's a mamzer. So you see that she could be sold to a mamzer. You see there could be a situation where the maidservant is sold to someone who's pasul. So matam adlomer la'ama. So then what is the amma coming to teach me as a maidservant? Melamed shemocher lekrovim. Rabbi Eliezer says, top of the next page, it's coming to teach me that he's allowed to sell her to krovim, to relatives. Says the Gemara, why do I need a pasuk to tell me? And again, right, even though he can't, the relatives can't marry her, but he's allowed to sell her. That's what the Alma's coming to teach me. They can't marry her, but he could sell her to the relatives. Says the Gemara Baladinu, Baritzakav Chomer, Imocher lepsulin lo yimkrena lekrovim. Isn't that obvious? If the father's allowed to sell his daughter to psulim, to mamzer, to someone who's disqualified from marrying her, shouldn't it be all the more so that he could sell her to a karov, to a relative? So the Gemara says, no, there's a big difference. No, the big difference is that for psulim, if they would want to marry her, it would work. They're not allowed to, but Kiddushin's tofes. Kiddushin takes effect by a mamzer. So maybe you would say that's where he can sell her to him. Not that we want them to be meyai, not that we want him to marry her, but it would work if he did. So maybe there it's relevant, maybe there it's possible to sell her. But yimkarena lekrovim, but you think that he should be able to sell her to a relative? Shimbrat l'yayid ain't meyayid. If you would want to marry her, you couldn't. It wouldn't take effect on her close relative. Kiddushin's not tofes. Kiddushin doesn't take effect. So maybe you would say that he can't sell her to a relative because it can't end in yud. It's not even possible. It can't end in marriage. So Amar Kra le'ama. That's why the Torah says le'ama, to a maidservant, nelamed shemocher lekrovim, to teach me that indeed she could be sold to a relative. Despite that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, even though the relative can never marry her, the father is still allowed to sell the maidservant, sell his daughter as a maidservant to a relative. Now Rabbi Meir, who used la'ama to teach me that you're allowed to make a tanai. Rabbi Meir was the first one. He said la'ama teaches me that the father is allowed to stipulate a condition. When he sells her, I'm only selling her as an amma. You can't marry her, even if it's a regular guy. You can't marry her. The Meir says that's what la'ama was teaching me. So lipsulin. So how does he know that he's allowed to sell her lipsulin? That was the second opinion. The opinion of the Rabbanan learned from Amma that you're allowed to sell her to a puzzle, to a mamzer. How does your mayor know that? He'll learn it from where Rabbi Eliezer learned it. Rabbi Eliezer learned it from the pasuk Imra'a be'enei Adonai. If she's bad in the eyes of her master and he doesn't marry her, and bad meant bad that he's not allowed to marry her. So but you see that he's the master, yet he's not allowed to marry her. That's because she's a puzzle. But you see, she could be sold to a puzzle, to a mamzer. So that's where a mayor will know that you could sell her lipsulin to a puzzle. Bikrovim, and what about to a relative? How does he know that you could sell her to a relative? The answer is he holds that you can't. Savar lak Rabbanan. He holds like the Rabbanan. Da'amri ein mocher likrovim. The Rabbanan say that she can't be sold to relatives. Okay, let's do a little bit more just to finish up this topic. Tani chada. One brisa said, mocher la'aviv ve'ein mocher libno. One brisa said that the father can sell her to his father as a maidservant, but he cannot sell her to his son as a maidservant, which is her brother. He could sell her to his grandfather, but not to his father, which is her grandfather, but not to his son, which is her brother. B'tanya idach, and another brisa says, ein mocher lo la'aviv lo livno. He can't sell her to either, not to his father, her grandfather, and not to his son, her brother. Bishlama eino mocher lo la'aviv lo livno k'Rabbanan. So I understand the opinion that says you can't sell her to either of them. That's like the Rabbanan, that you can't sell her to a relative who she's forbidden to marry. She can't marry her brother, she can't marry her grandfather, so you can't sell her as a maidservant to either of them. That would be fitting into the opinion of the Rabbanan. Ella, but the brisa that said mocher la'aviv ve'ein mocher livno, the brisa that said that you could sell her to the grandfather but not to the brother, that the father can sell her to his father but not to his son. Come on, who's that going like? Lo k'Rabbanan v'lo k'Rabbi Eliezer. It's neither like the Rabbanan and not like Rabbi Eliezer. The Rabbanan say you can't sell to any relative, so you can't sell to the grandfather. Rabbi Eliezer says you could sell to all relatives, so you should be able to sell to both the grandfather and the brother, the father and the son. So who's this brisa going like that says you could sell her to the father but not to the son? So the Gemara says olam k'Rabbanan. It's really going like the Rabbanan who say you can't sell to relatives. But modu Rabbanan heicha dikatzad yud. But the Rabbanan agree where there's a possibility of yud, there's a possibility of marrying her, then you could sell her. And what's that case? The case is the father can sell her to his father because that father, the grandfather, could marry her off to one of his sons, not her father, but one of her uncles. And that would be a permitted marriage. And therefore, even though the grandfather can't marry her himself, but her father's still allowed to sell her to her grandfather, to his father, because yiyud is possible. It's possible to designate her as a wife for one of his sons, one of her uncles. So even the Rabbanan, who normally say you can't sell to a relative who's forbidden to marry her, but if there's a way that relative's son can marry her, so then it would be permitted for her father to sell her as a maidservant to that person, in this case, the grandfather.